Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started in a few minutes, waiting for some more people to hop on. Super excited to be here today. Yeah, we'll get started in a few minutes. All right, folks. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm Sean Richardson. I'm an assistant director of alumni relations with attention to affinity programming, and that includes virtual programming. So I'm so happy you're here today. I'm excited to hear from both Megan and Allison on the Wedding People. We do have some questions that were received prior, so we're going to sort of focus our attention on those. But then, if time does allow, we will have some questions from the audience. So, this program will be recorded and will be uploaded to the Alumni Relations virtual programming site for future viewing and enjoying. It'll also be joining an elite arsenal of other virtual programming, so I'm excited for that. And here's a little brief introduction of our guest of the evening, Allison. The Wedding People was published on July 30th, 2024. The Wedding People is a propulsive and uncommonly wise novel about one unexpected wedding guest and the surprising people who help her start anew. Our conversation is featuring a reading and a little bit of a Q&A. Allison is also the author of The Adults, a New York Times editor's choice and a Barnes and Noble Discover pick, and notes on Your Sudden Disappearance, which was named Best Book in 2022 by the Chicago Tribune and NPR. Allison is currently a faculty member in the English department here at Providence College. So let's welcome Allison and we'll get started with a reading.
Thank you, Sean. Uh, really happy to be here. This is really nice. I wish I could see everyone who is here and say hello, but just consider this my hello to you. Also really exciting to be here tonight with Sean and Megan, our moderator for the evening, who are both former students of mine. So it's really awesome to, many years later wind up in this position where we're actually all, no longer in the classroom and we're all just working together. So that's, as a professor, that's really fun for me. I don't know if it's fun for you guys, but it's fun for me. It's the
So
dream.
much fun.
It's the professor dream. So here we are. So yeah, like Sean said, I'm going to start by giving a short reading. It's about 2 pages. So buckle up. Um, and I'm just going to read a little bit from the beginning. So if you haven't actually read the book yet, you have some sense of what the book's about and some sense of what Megan and I are chatting about tonight. It's pretty early on, the section I'm going to read, so you don't need to know much, but just a few things. The main character, her name is Phoebe. She's about 40 years old or about to turn 40. And she, instead of going to work this morning, she decides to take off, gets on a plane, and checks herself into a luxury hotel in Newport, Rhode Island. You don't really know why she's there. She's checked into the hotel. She's noticed that there is a very elaborate wedding being hosted this week at the same hotel. She's not super happy about that. But you don't really know why, and you don't really know what her plans are. So The scene I'm about to read is the scene where you find that out. The scene, touches on some dark themes, suicidal ideation. So just letting anyone know that. And it's one of the darker scenes in the book, but it really gives us a sense of like what the rest of the book will be about. Okay. Phoebe walks into the elevator and feels relief when the doors start to close. Finally, to be getting away from the wedding people, to be doing something for a change, to have a key to a place that is not her house. Hold the elevator, a woman calls out. Phoebe knows it's the bride before she sees her. She yells like she deserves this elevator. But nobody deserves anything, not even the bride. Phoebe presses the button to close the doors, but the bride slides a hand between them. They don't bounce open like they're supposed to, maybe because the Cornwall was built in 1864. An old hotel has no mercy, not even for the bride. Fuck, the bride shouts. Oh God, Phoebe says. She pries the doors back open, then stares at the bride's hand in disbelief. You're bleeding. The bride holds up the gash across the back of her knuckles like a child and takes the tissue Phoebe offers without saying thank you. Phoebe presses the button and the doors close again. The women don't say anything as the bride politely bleeds into the tissue and they begin to ascend. Phoebe hears the bride try to steady her breath, watches the tissue darken. I'm really sorry, Phoebe says. I didn't realize that would happen. Oh, I'm sure it'll be fine, the bride struggles to say. She clears her throat. So, are you in Gary's family? That's the other thing to know. That's her fiance. Uh, no, Phoebe says. Are you in my family? You don't know who's in your own family? Phoebe asks. The question makes Phoebe want to laugh, and it's a strange feeling. The first time she wanted to laugh in months, years maybe. Because how does the bride not know her own family? Phoebe knew everybody in her family. She had no choice. It was so small. Just Phoebe and her father, tiny enough to fit inside his old fishing cabin. I have a very large family, the bride says, like it's a problem. Well, I'm not in your family, Phoebe clarifies. You have to be in one of our families. No, Phoebe says, I'm not in any family. It had been a crushing realization, one that started slowly after the divorce and got stronger with each passing holiday, until she woke up this morning to such a quiet house. She finally understood what it meant to have no family. She understood it would always be like this, just her, in bed, alone, no longer even the sound of her cat Harry meowing at the door. But everybody's here for the wedding. I made sure of it, the bride says. This has to be some kind of mistake. The bride says it as if Phoebe is the big nightmare she's always been dreading. Phoebe is something going wrong at a time when nothing is supposed to go wrong, because every little thing during a wedding has the power to feel like an omen. Like the high winds through the park that flipped over the paper plates and sent a chill down Phoebe's spine on her own wedding day. We should have gotten real plates, she thought, something with weight and substance. There's no mistake, Phoebe says. This is Phoebe's happy place, the place Phoebe has chosen out of all the possible places. How dare the bride make Phoebe feel like she's not supposed to be here? But if you're not here for the wedding, then what are you here for? The bride asks in a much lower pitch, as if her real voice has finally emerged. Because now, in this private space, with a person not attending the wedding, the bride doesn't have to be the bride. She can speak however she wants, and so can Phoebe. She is nobody, and the only good thing about being nobody is that she can now say whatever the fuck she wants, even to the bride. I'm here to kill myself, Phoebe says. She says it without drama or emotion, as if it's just a fact, because that's what it is. She waits for the truth of it to stun the bride into an awkward silence, but the bride only looks confused. What did you just say? The bride asks. I said, I'm here to kill myself, Phoebe repeats, more firmly this time. It feels good to say it out loud. If she can't say it out loud, then she probably won't be able to do it. And she has to do it. She's decided. She's come all this way. She feels relief as the doors begin to open, but the bride presses the button to close them. No, the bride says. No? Phoebe asks. No, you definitely cannot kill yourself. This is my wedding week. Your wedding is a week? Well, like 6 days if you want to be technical about it. That's a long wedding. Phoebe's wedding was a single night. She had tried not to make a big deal out of it, and why? It seemed silly now to have not celebrated something good when she had the chance. But Phoebe and her husband were a year out of graduate school, trained to live on a stipend with a cheap bottle of wine and a nice tree in the distance. And a wedding was such a spectacle, Phoebe thought. Every time she ordered flowers or sampled another piece of cake or told her friends how happy she was, she got this horrible feeling that she was bragging. A week is actually pretty standard now, the bride says, with a tone that makes Phoebe feel old. And people are coming a long way to be here, but Phoebe doesn't care. This is the most important week of my life, the bride pleads. Same, Phoebe says. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Allison. Um, that's one of my favorite passages in the book because, like you say, it is so dark, but it is so encompassing. Um, and I think something that really struck me about it, and as you're rereading it here, I'm like laughing out loud at this, even though it's so dark. So what was it like for you writing that, blending that humor with that darkness, and these real struggles that Phoebe and Lila and so many of these characters are going through?
It was actually one of the first scenes that I wrote when I started writing this book. I started writing the book many years ago. I don't know exactly what year, I wish I did, but it was in the middle of working on my second novel, Notes on Your Sudden Disappearance. And I don't know how many writers are listening to this, but if you're a writer, you know that sometimes it's really exciting to cheat on your novel with another novel. Like you're like, I've been with this novel for so many years and it's just getting me down. And my second novel in particular was based on or inspired by, I'm not, it's not an exact retelling, but it just inspired by some of my experiences of losing my brother when we were teenagers. And so that was like a dark place to be sometimes. And um, I started fantasizing about writing like what I thought of as a really fun novel. And that fantasy started with just like a woman being like, I'm not going to work today, screw work, and checking herself into the most ridiculous hotel she can think of. And I was like, what's really fun to read about? Weddings, so I'll make a big wedding happen there. And really all I had to do was figure out why she was there, like, was she a wedding guest? Was she there for some other reason? I just kept thinking of the word fun. Like I was like, I just want it to be fun. Uh, and I was like, maybe she's there to have an affair. This will be like a sexy book, or maybe she's there as an assassin, and this will be like my fun murder book, right? Um, and I just couldn't make any of those things work. And finally, I wrote this scene the way I read, as it is now. And I was like, oh, that's the plot. Like I knew it. It felt right. It felt like it was working, but I was so disappointed because I was like, that's not fun. It's like I just ruined it. I made it sad. And so I actually put it away for a few years because I was just like, no, that's exactly what I would do to a novel, and I am just tired of it. So I went back to my other novel. I finished that because it seemed a lot lighter all of a sudden. And then, years later, I was just looking for something else to work on, and I, was digging through old files and I read that scene, and I kind of, having so much distance from it really helped. I read it like a reader would read it. I kind of forgot what happened. And I thought, oh, yeah, it's dark, but I could see the humor in it too. And I knew that you just learn things about yourself as a writer. I'm like, that's what I do. Like, I do the tragedy, I do the comedy, and they're like somehow so intertwined that I can't quite explain it, but it's just how I see the world and it's what I love most about the world. So, I think there are periods in your life as a writer where you reject what you do. Like when I'm like, no, I hate what I do, go away. And then there are times when you realize, oh, that's my strength. Like that's that's what it needs to be. And so I was able to continue working on it, knowing that I really wanted that balance of light and dark.
Well, and it's ultimately so hopeful and life affirming in the way that it plays out. Because I think, as you say, these characters, their ability to find joy and find meaning in life despite all of the tough, horrible, hard things is really just like it sparkles off the page. And I think it makes that like that joy so much more meaningful. So my second part of that question is, at what point did you know how you were going to end it or where these characters were going?
I always knew the structure of it, which means I knew it was going to start with the hotel, like with Phoebe walking in, and I knew it was going to end with her leaving. And that was the scope of the book, which was really useful to know. I don't always know that when I start writing. And so I knew that something needed to happen in that space, but I really didn't know what was going to happen. I knew she was going, and I hope this isn't a spoiler, but I don't think it is. I knew she was going to leave the hotel feeling okay. Like that was the challenge to me as a writer. She walks in not okay, but she leaves okay. And the fun of writing the book was like, how did she get there? I don't know. I don't know what's going to have to happen for her to feel that way. And that's really the stuff I don't plot out. I just kind of let happen, but I knew what the major choices were, like um does she leave okay? Yes. Does the wedding happen? Anytime there's a wedding in a story, it's sort of like Chekhov's gun. It's like, does the gun go off or not? Or does the wedding happen or not? And so I knew that was a choice, and I'm not going to give that away. I feel like that would be a real spoiler. Um, and is anything going to happen? Like, is Phoebe going to fall in love? Is she going to meet someone who's going to matter for the rest of her life? Those are the big things I did not know. Um, I did know she was going to have a meaningful, pivotal experience. And she was going to meet strangers that changed the way she saw herself and the way she saw the world. And that I just had to figure out as I went along.
Well, and part of the fun of it is those characters come so alive. It feels inevitable what happens to them. And one of my favorite things as your student that you talked about in classes was characterization. Uh, I still remember talking about that in class, and I
What did
think
I
that's
say? What did I say? I don't know.
one of the things that really struck me that you talked about is the little things in a character that really pull out who they are. And it's not, someone walking into a room and saying, I'm depressed, but it's how they're interacting with other people and, what they're doing and the choices that they're making. And I think that even before Phoebe says she's going to kill herself, you can tell she's not okay. This isn't a character that's walking into this hotel because she's on a happy vacation. And I think you do that so well in this book. And from that moment when Phoebe and Lila meet, um, they really just have this vivid ideation of who they are. So, I know you just talked about how Phoebe came to you, but did all of the other characters kind of come to you as concretely? Did they come piece by piece as the story evolved?
I should also note for the audience that Megan just recalled something from a class like almost 10 years ago. So I'm
It
very
stuck with me.
confident
A good
as a
teacher.
result. Yeah. That is also a professor's dream. Yeah. Uh, so thank you. Yeah, Lila and Phoebe sort of showed up as a pair. I mean, I had Phoebe first, and she was walking into the wedding, and then I was like, okay, well, there's going to be a bride. Um, and I was thinking a lot at the time that I was writing this in terms of opposites or paired contrasts, which is another thing I talked about a lot or I talk about a lot in my fiction classes, which is like kind of the simplest way of understanding plot without getting too fussy with detail, is just like a character is feeling something that is not in harmony with their environment, right? And So Phoebe was sad, and that is not in harmony with the vibe of a wedding. And that to me was like, that's what when I say I knew, I knew that was going to be the plot. That's why I knew it was the plot, because those two to me just struck me as exact opposites, right? Like murder isn't the opposite of a wedding. I mean, it could be in a way, but uh, to me, like what a wedding is really about is like that essential happiness that either you feel or you're supposed to feel, but it's all about happiness and starting happiness and bringing happiness into your life. And so the opposite of that, like what threatens that is sadness, is despair, is hopelessness. So that's why it just really worked for me. And so because Phoebe was the embodiment of that, kind of walking into the hotel, bringing that sadness, to me, the bride was just automatically like the happiness. And it was, that's really how I thought of her for a while. Even though, when you start to get to know her, you're like, she doesn't seem that happy. But she wants happy. Her goal is happiness. Like she kind of demands happiness from people around her and demands perfection. Um, and so that's all I knew about her for a while. And then the challenge of writing her was like, how is she not just that? Like moving beyond the stereotype or the bridezilla stereotype of like, she's not just this way. Like she's all these other million things. And how can I how can I give life to those times when actually she acts completely out of character? And what was fun, in their conversations is that Phoebe brings out that side of her, because she's a total stranger. The bride around Phoebe, the bride doesn't have to be the bride. She can actually be something that no one else at the wedding lets her be, which is honest. And so that's where I hoped Lila really came alive for the reader, because that's where she came alive for me as a writer.
Yeah, absolutely. As a reader, I think those moments when they're being so vulnerable and honest with each other and like saying the things that like feel mean, but then you really actually did need to hear and somebody had to say it to you. I think they have these like big moments of self-realization that are just so powerful. And I think from the very first moment, like when they're encountering each other in that hotel lobby, and even before that elevator scene, Lila hands Phoebe a gift bag, and is like welcoming everybody to the lobby. And in this moment where Phoebe is so utterly depressed and she's in the wake of a divorce and living through a global pandemic and all of these heavy things, she has this moment where she feels seen, and it feels so powerful. And I think so much of this novel is about connection and loneliness. And how did that kind of come through for you writing?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it started with that gift bag, really, like when Lila hugs Phoebe, because Lila assumes everyone in the hotel is there for her wedding. So she just sees Phoebe and assumes that Phoebe matters in the way that like, she must matter. I invited you to my wedding. I don't know who you are, but like, I must know you, and she gives her this big hug, and Phoebe describes it as like so genuine, like it feels like they're long lost cousins, or like, and Phoebe's been alone for so long, and that simple, even though it's not for her, she still experiences the hug, right? And it's still like is just the tiniest bit of connection to someone else and I wanted to explore those like really tiny bits of connection that start to add up. Or like these tiny moments of softness that for Phoebe start to add up, So a lot of it starts with Lila kind of being the pestering bride who doesn't want to see a tragedy unfold at her wedding. But that means she's constantly knocking on Phoebe's door. Like she's constantly barging in, being like, oh, let me just sit here and talk to you all night because otherwise I'm worried you're going to do something. And that mattered. That ends up mattering to Phoebe. She, instead of being alone in the room, she's with someone else sharing a conversation with her. The other thing that was interesting to think about was how the hotel itself was going to affect Phoebe. Like I really wanted the setting to matter. And this was a luxury hotel. Another reason I stopped writing this book was that I had never stayed at a luxury hotel. I had never, I come from a family of like Hilton loyalists, so that was like the top tier for us. And they're nice, but they're not luxury hotels in Newport, And I felt like I couldn't even write it. Like I tapped out my what my imagination could do, and I had started to feel like a fraud, just like describing the drapes, like they're so expensive seeming, or they're so luxurious, like it just, I was like, I don't know how to do this. And I'm never gonna have, I'm never gonna spend $800 a night to stay at a hotel. So I guess I'm just never gonna write this novel. I ended up applying for a research grant that PC gives out to professors for their research. I'd never applied for it before just because a lot of my research is just like thinking of my past, like I don't need that much funding for it. A train ticket home could help, whatever. But I was like, why don't I ask to stay at this hotel? Because it's honestly one of the reasons I stopped working on the book. And I wasn't sure. I mean, I was not sure if they were just going to laugh in its face. But I made a very compelling proposal and they actually gave it to me. So I got to stay at a very nice hotel in Newport. And thank God I did, because it really changed the book. I mean, it opened up the book for me. So one of the scenes that I'm thinking about when I think about like moments of connection that help Phoebe start to pivot, that come from the hotel. The very first night I was there, I was feeling like an imposter because I was like the only hotel guest like there on scholarship, like it was, I was like, I can't afford anything but the nightly rate. So like I kept calling down to see if the water was free, or like if the guava juice in the corner was like $20 or whatever. And when there was someone who came up at like at evening time and knocked on the door, and he was like, I'm here to turn down the room. And Hilton, member was like, I've never heard this phrase before. Uh, like what? I was just like, I don't think I need that. I don't know what that is. And he's like, oh, it's just I'm here to like get you ready for bed, And I was like, oh, okay. Like, what does that involve? Like, come on in. And he
For the research.
yeah, yeah. I was like, this is a nice service, and of course he just like closed the drapes and like pulled the bedspread back and did like a few other things, but I was imagining how this would all land on Phoebe. She's feeling so alone and nighttime is really hard for her. And here comes this person who's just gonna like help her get ready for bed, help turn the room down. And she's not alone, and even though it's just his job, it's still like the hotel played that role of like, there's just these moments where like the the ways that the hotel has thought about you in advance and like what you might need or want become really clear to the guest. And that can feel in its own way, like if you need it, that can feel really nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, PC, for the research grant, because the element of place in this is so beautifully done. And I think the hotel, it feels like its own character in the novel. It's such a particular space. And it really, yeah, you feel these characters kind of take what they need from it.
Yeah, I feel like I revolutionized the way my colleagues thought about grants. They're like, oh, yeah.
There's going to be a big stack now to go through.
So we can just say this is our research. Yeah. But it really was. It really was. Yeah.
For research. One of the other things that really strikes me about this book is how much Phoebe and Lila both grapple with expectations of what they're supposed to do versus what they desire. And in so many ways, this unlikely friendship that they develop really kind of helps both of them to go after the life that they want. And do you feel like the change that they both experience by the end of the novel would have happened eventually, was inevitable to them, or was it really like this place, this moment, these interactions really were the catalyst and the only way this could have happened to either of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a novelist, that's how you really force yourself to think. You're like, this is because of this and because of that and because of this and because of that, this happens. And the only way that this could have happened is if all of those other things happen. Like that I think that's what makes a story feel really important and really remarkable sometimes, is that you see the kind of disparate things that had to fall into place in order for someone to change so remarkably. So I'm sure they could have found their way there some other way, but as a novelist, you're like, no, this is the only way. This is the only way it could have happened. Um, and I like to think that because, you know, Phoebe needed to be outside of her life for this to happen, right? Because she felt she couldn't express how she was feeling in any area of her actual life. Um, and I think the same was true for Lila, right? So they needed to be in this almost like the neutral space that a hotel room provides with a total stranger who really doesn't give a crap about them. Like they needed that
Mhm.
indifference, because with that indifference comes a kind of freedom. It's like, if you're the kind of person who likes to talk to people at airports, which I am, sorry for all of you people who do not like to talk at airports, or, if you're on a business trip and you sit at the hotel bar and you strike up a conversation, like those conversations, I love those conversations because you can say anything. It doesn't matter. You're not micromanaging that relationship. You're not thinking about what you're saying, how it's going to affect things down the line. I think that's all the micromanaging that we do in our relationships and our friendships. And that can sometimes, unfortunately, make us not that honest with each other. Even though we love those people and want to be honest, it's hard. The stakes are too high. So for me, like, they just needed to be in a situation where there was total indifference, and that indifference is like what unlocks them, because it's freedom. And for someone to say, I'm going to kill myself, and for the other person to just only think about themselves and say, no, this is my I like to you know that's the wrong way to respond. But for Phoebe, I think it just sort of shocked her out of her own feeling. Like it brought her closer back into the world, because she's thinking, who is this person and how could they be so rude? And like, that's a different thought than just being
Mhm.
in despair, right? So yeah, I thought a lot about that. Like, why this space? Why now? Why these people? Um, and I hope that came through as
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it unlocks this tenderness between them. Like one of my favorite parts is later when Lila says, like, I actually was worried about you and I kept bothering you because you are a person that I didn't want to see die. Like there's this like they're both very abrasive to each other and in a way that feels almost more tender and loving than I think they are with the people that they do know and love. Just
Yeah.
because it has that honesty.
Yeah, and I think that's why those characters that we see who are like that, we can really be endeared by them, because even though they might seem harsh, there's an honesty there that, yeah, exactly what you're saying, strikes us as more caring, more tender, because it's not deceitful. You know, I mean, anyone who's ever had a partner and tried to figure out where to go to dinner knows like how alienating it can be. Like when someone's like, hey, where do you want to go to dinner? And it's like, oh,
Whatever you
I
want.
don't care whatever you want. And then I have a tie. And it's like, sure. And you're like, do you really want tie? Or you just, you know, it's like that level of not knowing whether someone's being honest because they love you. They want to do what you want to do. But in some ways those are the moments that can distance us from each other because there's something really comforting about being with a person who's like, I want Thai. Sorry if you don't. You know, now you know, okay, you want Thai food. And if we don't get Thai food, you're going to be annoyed, you know, but like now you know, and that's somewhere to start from, to work with. And that's what Lila gives Phoebe.
Yeah. And I think that's like such an important part of her journey is you can say, I don't like that. I don't want that.
Exactly.
And yeah, and that's how you find your joy and your happiness and your journey. Another thing I really loved in this novel was all of the literary references that you weave in, the Mrs. Dalloway epigraph at the beginning, and then Phoebe coming back to that book that she put down and years before, and finally reading the ending. There's Charlotte Bronte, there's all of these literary references that I think really add to the weight of the story. How did you think about adding those in? How did your work teaching and reading these texts over and over again for classes impact the way you saw them and the way you incorporated them into this novel?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, the more the more years I spend as a writer, the more I'm comfortable with like writing what I feel I am an expert in, you know, and actually I wouldn't say I'm an expert in those novels because there are actual experts in those novels. I've just read those novels like 15 times, you know, like I teach them every year. I read them over and over again. I read papers on them. I plan lessons on them, you know, so I've thought about them a lot. And when you spend like so much of your time doing something, you start to wonder, like, why am I not using that? You know, uh, I've thought about this a lot more than many people have. Like, I should write about that. I think there was a resistance on my part to be a writer who writes about books. I don't know why exactly, just in the fear of, you know, it just being too stereotypical or something. I'm not sure, but I just was like, okay, you know what? Embrace it. This is how you spend your life. Like, write about these books. But it was something I thought a lot about, like how so many of these books were centered on the marriage plot. You know, the story of a young woman begins when courtship begins and ends once they're married, right? Which is a fun story to read. I do love those books. I've loved reading them. I will continue to read them. And yet at the same time, there's something really limiting about that being the most common narrative that you see, which is, okay, your life begins when a man sees you and your life ends when you're married. Like that's the end of the interesting stuff. And what I loved about Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway is that she picks up many years later when Clarissa Dalloway is 52, you know, beyond marriage or beyond the wedding, beyond having children, and it's just like an ordinary day in her life. Um, and I thought that was really a clever play on the marriage plot and making us see like, oh, these women's lives continue and they continue to have complicated thoughts and they're not always so jazzed about being married. It's complicated being married, you know, and she gave such a really compelling, complicated look into this woman's world. Um, I wanted I wanted to do that, you know, like, so I just really felt inspired by that project and also just wanted to incorporate that as part of Phoebe's inspiration too. Being afraid of that book because it's so dark sometimes And then by the end of the story, or the end of my novel, Phoebe it's helped her see herself in a new way, which is what I think the best books can do.
Mm-hmm. And it feels like the monster under the bed at the beginning of the book, like this haunting thing that she never finished the book and it was horrible. And she's like, oh, I read it and I feel seen and I get it. And it wasn't that bad in the end. And yeah, you can look the hard things in the face and come out on the other end, I think is kind of part of what it was for her.
Yeah, and there's a line, I'm going to butcher it because it's been like 6 months since I've taught this novel and I've forgotten it. But Mrs. Dalloway is throwing a big party, and when she hears of Septimus Smith's suicide in the middle of her party, she has this reaction of, and it's not her only reaction, but one of her many reactions to news is, oh, how rude that death showed up at my party, or something like that. And hi, sorry,
Oh yeah, you
back?
cut out for a minute, but you're back.
What did I last say?
You were right at how rude that death showed up at my party.
Right. Oh, how rude that death showed up at my party. And that was a line that really inspired the wedding people, because that's how it begins. Like, here comes Phoebe. Oh, how rude to show up at how rude to bring the death to my party. And so I kind of wanted to start at that point and then see what happened once death did show up at the party.
Love that. Was there anything that ended up in the book that surprised you as you were writing it?
Most of it surprised me. This is what happens when you're not a outliner. You're like, oh, wow, who knew that was going to happen? I mean, a lot of the characters who weren't big in the beginning became big, like Jim. They're, yeah, it's hard to say without giving any spoilers, but some of the relationships that develop between some of the wedding people, like, did not have that in mind at all when I showed up. And then you start to see, you put people in conversation together and there's a vibe. You're like, oh, they're actually flirting. I didn't see these I wouldn't have put these two characters together, but I don't know, for some reason it's working in the dialogue, and that happened a bit. So that was fun. Yeah.
That's very fun. Yeah, I feel like this novel's rich with characters that like they all have their own lives going on. We've talked so much about Phoebe and Lila, but Gary is such a central part of this narrative as well. Like, he is also supposed to be getting married at this wedding. And he has his own interior and his own wants and needs and desires. And he's also dealing with some hard things, and how you be in relationship with other people, and also deal with your own tough stuff. So I think it was really fun for me to see all of these characters, and I love that Jim is one that came out as you wrote. He's so funny.
I did like Jim. Yeah, he was fun.
Do you have a favorite side character?
I really don't have a favorite. I actually get asked this question a lot, and I wish I had a more interesting answer. I think all side characters are kind of fun because you get to play with, like, the one thing that you know about them. Like Jim double fists, like, muscle milk and beer, for a while in the beginning, and that's like all I was like, what an idiot, what a fool, and then you're like, no, he's more than that. And so you get to push that and see who else is there behind just the guy who seems like a doofus, but is really not. So I just love that. So I don't have a favorite. Sorry.
Well, and just by nature of who Phoebe is in relation to all the wedding people, I think so much of their interior is uncovered in these conversations she's having with them as she goes, because they're all kind of having a confessional with her.
Yeah.
I know when you were on the Today Show, you talked about your work in a photo booth. Um, would you like to speak more to that and how that, your view on weddings and all of that? I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, so in graduate school, I got a job working as a photo booth attendant at a company that rented out photo booths for different events. It wasn't always a wedding, but it was often a wedding. And this was in 2009, so this was really before we were used to seeing them at weddings all the time. So I would go and I would stand next to them and kind of like explain the photo booth to people and just like manage it. But I was always wearing a cocktail party dress. Just people would come over to me and they saw like a lonely wedding guest, who was really bored, and they probably were themselves, so they came to talk to a stranger, and they would find out I wasn't there for the wedding, and that would really open them up. Like they'd be like, "Oh, good, I can be honest. So like I don't like the bride, or I don't like the groom, or I don't, you know, and yeah, so I just at all these events I was always the stranger. I was always Phoebe, getting to know the real dirt about what was going on. And so I that inspired the part of the stranger's perspective at these events.
Very cool. So we have a couple audience questions coming in. So a lot of people are asking about the cover, which I love. I know you probably did not design your own cover, but what was the thought process that went in from the design team on this cover, and what did you think of it?
Yeah, you don't get much say. They kind of just present you with an option, and they try to limit the amount of options you see, because I can tell they've probably had trouble in the past with giving the author too many options. So I usually only just see one option and they're like, this is the one we all love. Um, and so it's kind of hard to go up against it because it's presented as like the unanimous beloved cover. But I didn't love the option they sent me. It was sort of just like a aerial view of Newport. It wasn't bad. I don't know. It just didn't, it would have been fine. I didn't love it. So I said I didn't love it. And I was expecting, like, usually when that happens, they're like, well, do you want to see the font change? Do you want to see, like little small things? And instead they just sent back the cover that it is now. And I was like, oh, wow, I love that one. Yeah, I just loved it. So it was really, um, very fortunate, because a lot of times they're like, what font do you want? And then I'm like, I don't know. I'm a writer. I only know like 2 fonts. So
Times New Roman?
yeah, Georgia sometimes when I'm feeling bored. So you don't want to ask, like, I never know what to say to that question. And then usually it starts, conversation breaks down. So I felt really lucky that they just had this kind of perfect option that I was like, yes, go for it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. Um, is there any of these characters or any of the events in the book that are based off of people or things in your real life?
I mean, there are always things that are inspiring me in some ways, like, and excuse me, on a really small scale, excuse me, Neckpillow, who's a character you meet very early on in the lobby when Phoebe is looking around and she's seeing people, and she's like, there's a woman with a neck pillow on from the airport, and she just calls her neck pillow in her head. That actually was from me being at an airport, and I was watching, I had a long layover, and I was like next to a couple, and the woman had an airplane neck pillow around her neck while they were eating dinner. And she kept talking, and the husband kept sounding really annoyed. And I just kept wondering, if she took off the neck pillow, would he sound less annoyed? Like, was he annoyed by the fact that she was still wearing this thing while they were dining? Um, and I just wrote that down in my journal like years ago, not thinking anything of it. And then when I got to the lobby scene and I was like, I need people like with distinguishing features, that's going to reveal something about them right away. And I just, neck pillow was right there, you know? So that's a good example of how like I pull things from real life. Like they're not a one-to-one direct, like no one would really know that, but I know where I got that observation from. So a lot of things in the book are like that. I don't usually do like exact like experiences that I've had, mostly just because fiction is more interesting. Like even when I do start writing about my own experiences, I totally fictionalize them and go in really random directions because I can't stay with reality.
So you have had no dramatic wedding experiences like Phoebe.
No. No, but I
So
did stay at a luxury hotel, so there's that, you know.
so there's that.
Yeah.
So I know you said you're not an outliner, but do you have any other writing processes that you utilize?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I tend to write in the mornings. I find it's hard to write afternoon. That used to not be the case for me when I was younger, especially like in college and grad school. I could write all the time. I think you just get to a certain age where you're like, that's enough. You're like, at a certain point of the day, I want to stop having intense thoughts, you know? You give yourself a cutoff. So I like mornings. And you know, I don't know if they're processes, but they tend to be rules. I usually let myself overwrite. I let myself over dramatize something. Um, you know, I I make the characters do the ridiculous thing or say the ridiculous thing and then decide if I want to pare that back, you know. Um, and so a lot of my writing is cutting, usually, like erasing some of the things that I took too far or yeah.
A lot of people are curious about the publishing process and how you got started getting your work publishing. Is there anything you'd want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, right now, the way the world is, uh, you generally need an agent to publish a novel. That's not always the case if you go with an independent press, but you know, that's hard. That's its own path too. It can be difficult. So generally, if you're someone who's looking to publish a novel, the first thing to do is to look for an agent. And you can do that by Googling agents. That's kind of what I did. It's probably more complicated now. I don't know what's on the internet when you Google that, but you know, looking for reading your favorite books, finding out who represents those authors is probably the best way to start that process because then you know, okay, this agent represents someone whose writing I like and they got a book published. You know, it kind of gives you a sense that they're maybe a good fit for you. So I made a list of those people and then I sent out a query, which is just essentially a will you represent me letter. It's its own work of art. So you definitely have to research how to do those. And then
Google is very helpful for that one too.
very helpful. Other writers, you know, can be really helpful for that. And then that agent does the work of selling the book for you, right? So you really don't have to know how to sell your own book. You just have to know how to get an agent. And then that takes you through the process. It can be helpful to do other things before that, like going to graduate school is one way people you know, start building up their career. You don't have to do that. You can just start publishing short stories in magazines. But you can also just query an agent. People get agents without having published anything. They just have a really solid book proposal and it works for them.
When you submitted your first book, did you have your full manuscript written or did you submit as a proposal?
Yeah. With fiction, you need, if it's fiction and you're an unknown entity, you need the manuscript already done, which is a real bummer. Because it's hard to, you know, invest all those years into something that you're like just crossing your fingers about. But that's unfortunately, that is the process, because the first thing the agent's going to ask if they like the proposal is, can you send me the manuscript? And if you don't have it ready, that's not good. Yeah.
Not really something you can pull an all-nighter to finish.
And they won't know if they can sell the book until they have the whole thing. So if you're writing nonfiction, sometimes you can sell it just on proposal alone, but that's a different story.
Is there any particular classes or professors when you were at PC that impacted you as a writer?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them. I really liked my education at PC. I felt very connected to it. I didn't feel that connected to my high school education, but it felt very connected to my college education. So virtually every class affected me in some way, but I will say the creative writing classes that I took with Peter Johnson, I took a modern poetry class with Bill Hogan that really made me feel like I could read and write about poetry for the first time. I had never felt that way before, so that was an important experience. And I found out that we're colleagues now, so I told him that class really changed me, and he was like, wow, that was my first semester teaching ever. He's like, I thought it went horribly. I was like, no, you did a great job, changed my life. So we were sort of like ships passing. I was leaving, he was coming in, and we got to, laugh about that years later as colleagues. So.
That's the goal, right?
Yeah,
Impact one student.
Here you are. Here we are. Yeah.
Okay, and I think we have to wrap up now, but one final fun question. Are you reading anything fun right now or any recommendations?
I just finished reading Heartwood by Amity Gage.
Oh, yes.
I'm doing a festival with her in a week, so I
Oh,
wanted to.
she's so fun.
Yeah, have you met her?
Yeah.
Oh,
We published her and I got to go to a
you
conference
did.
with her. Yeah.
Yeah, she seems like she'd be fun. I loved all of her characters. So I really love that book. So Heartwood by Amity Gage. I really loved Green Dot by Madeline Gray. I thought that was a very funny, dark, funny book. Yeah. But at the moment, I'm between books. So if anyone has any recommendations, put it in the chat.
Throw them in the chat. We'll make a reading list. Well, thank you, Allison. Thank you, everyone who was able to come and join us tonight. This has been such a fun conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. This is you've been so fun and interesting to talk to. So what a treat for me, honestly. And I like I said, I wish I could see everyone and say hi, but I consider this my big hello.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. I'm so grateful to hear more about the wedding people and your process, Allison, and a huge thank you to Megan for moderating the conversation. And of course, once again, this was recorded, so please share with your friends, share with your family, share with anyone who reads books, share with anyone, like point blank period, please. And thank you all again. Have a wonderful night. Bye, everyone.
Bye.